On a deserted street in the pouring rain, Maya, a young black nurse just off a long night shift, spots a soaked, shivering boy sitting alone by the roadside. Without hesitation, she brings him home, feeds him, and helps him get warm. The boy remembers, only that his father works at a hospital with a faded photo as his only clue. Maya takes him there, only to be judged and nearly fired. What she doesn't know is that his father is the hospital's CEO, and what happens next will change her life forever. Before we dive in, this story lets us know where you're watching from. We'll love to hear your thought. It was a night soaked in darkness and water. Heavy rain poured over the nearly deserted city streets like an endless sheet of grief. Storefronts had long closed. Neon signs flickered weakly through the fogged glass, and the only sounds were the sharp tapping of rain against metal and the distant rumble of thunder. Cars were scarce, people even more so. Those who remained outside hurried beneath umbrellas or huddled beneath awnings, eyes cast away, unwilling to engage with a storm or anything else. And that's when she appeared. A modest silver sedan, worn but cared for, rolled slowly down the slick avenue. Behind the wheel sat Maya Brooks, a 25-year-old black woman, her hair neatly tied back in a bun, soaked to the edges from earlier dashes between hospital wings. Her scrubs, teal-faded and clinging slightly to her arms, hinted at a 12-hour shift that had drained her physically but not emotionally. Her eyes, dark and steady, scanned the road, not just for obstacles, but for anything, anyone. Her spirit was tired, but still soft. That kind of softness the world often tried to crush in women like her. She'd gotten used to the looks, the way patients' families hesitated when she entered a room, how some of the older nurses called her girl instead of her name, how a white security guard once followed her out of the break room, asking for her ID on her 4th week of working there. And yet Maya smiled, not because she liked it, because she refused to let it change her. Tonight was supposed to be just another ride home, her playlist on shuffle, eyes half shut at stoplights. But as she slowed to turn onto a side street near the industrial edge of town, her headlights caught something that made her foot freeze on the brake. A small figure, soaked, shivering, sitting on the edge of the curb in the pouring rain. Maya's heart lurched. She looked around. No one else, no other cars, no one on the sidewalk. Everyone had chosen to ignore it. Whatever it was, maybe they didn't see, maybe they didn't care. She did. She pulled the car over, letting the engine idle, as she grabbed her jacket from the passenger seat and stepped out into the downpour. Her sneakers slapped the pavement, soaking through immediately. The rain didn't bother her. What did was the way the boy flinched when she approached. He couldn't have been more than 10. Thin, pale, skin flushed red from the cold, clothes hanging off him, too big, too torn, too it, hair plastered to his forehead, shoes worn through. He stared at her with wide eyes, not speaking, not moving, just scared. "Hey," Maya said gently, crouching to his level, the rain running down her cheeks like tears she hadn't cried yet. "You okay, baby?" The boy shook his head slowly, then looked away. She saw it in his eyes. He didn't trust her. He didn't trust anyone. "Do you need help? A ride somewhere? You're freezing out here." No answer. Maya glanced back at her car. She shouldn't, but she had, too. She reached into her pocket, pulled out her ID badge, and held it up. "I work at the hospital. See, you're safe with me. I promise. Still nothing. But he didn't run. That was enough. I'm going to put you in my car just to warm you up." "Okay, I'll turn the heat on. You don't have toe talk." She slowly extended her hand. The boy stared at it. Seconds passed, then barely. He moved, stood up, took her hand. Inside the car, Maya blasted the heat, handed him a clean towel from her gym bag in the back seat, and gave him her spare hoodie. It was too big on him, but dry. He curled into the seat, silent but no longer shaking. Maya looked at him through the rear view mirror. "I'm Maya," she said softly. "You don't have to tell me your name yet. But if you want food, a shower, a bed, You can come with me. Just for tonight. No response. She didn't need one. As she pulled back onto the road, the streetlights passed over them like waves of gold. And somewhere deep in her chest, she felt it. This wasn't just a kid in need. This was something bigger. Something about this night would change everything. The rain had eased by the time Maya pulled into her narrow driveway, though puddles still glistened like mirrors under the dim glow of the porch light. The small one-story house was nothing fancy. Peeling white paint, a creaky wooden step, and a mailbox that leaned like it was tired, but it washes. It had taken 3 years of back-to-back shifts, skipped, vacations, and second-hand furniture to claim this tiny corner of stability. As she stepped out of the car, she glanced at the boy, still curled in her hoodie like it was armor. He hadn't said a word the entire ride. She opened his door gently, saying nothing this time. He stepped out on his own, eyes low, shoes squishing on Thewit gravel. Inside, the air smelled faintly of lavender and detergent. A small couch, 2 mismatched chairs, and a tiny kitchenette filled the open living space. Maya flicked on the heater and knelt by an old cabinet, pulling out a clean towel and a pair of pajama pants that once belonged to her younger brother before he moved away. These should fit okay, she said, handing them to him without expecting a thank. Bathrooms down the hall, second door. There's soap and a toothbrush still wrapped. You can take your time. He hesitated before taking the clothes. His fingers were pink from cold, but she saw the way they gripped the fabric tightly, like it meant something to have something. Then he disappeared down the hallway. Maya exhaled slowly, sagging into the armrest of her couch, rubbing her temple. Her mind spun with silent questions. Who is this boy? Where's his family? Should she have called the police? But even as those thoughts came, her gut pushed them away. Something about the way. He looked at her. So much fear, yet the tiniest flicker of trust told her this wasn't about protocol. This was about humanity. By the time he came out, changed and damp-made, Maya had made grilled cheese and tomato soup, simple but warm. She placed the bowl in front of him on the coffee table, then backed off, giving him space. He didn't touch the food right away. He stared at it like he wasn't sure if it was real, then slowly lifted the spoon. The first bite must have hit something deep because he blinked hard like holding back tears. She turned away to give him privacy. It wasn't until the dishes were in the sink and Maya sat with a blanket draped over her lap that he finally spoke. "My name's Elliot," he said, voice small and dry. She looked up gently. "Hi, Elliot." A pause. Then, "Thank you for not leaving me." The words cracked her open. She smiled, her voice softer now. "You don't have to thank me. I couldn't just drive by." He fidgeted with the edge of the blanket, eyes down. "I was trying to find my dad." Maya's brows knit together. "Do you know where he is?" "Elliot works at a hospital," Elliot answered. I think something happened. He hasn't come home for days." He looked up at her, brows tight. "I tried to go find him myself." Her heart squeezed. "You went alone," he nodded. Then from his backpack, a thin and nearly empty, he pulled out a folded piece of paper. No, not paper. A magazine clipping, a glossy photo crumpled and torn at the edges, showing the shining white facade of a hospital building. There was no writing, just the picture, but Maya recognized it immediately. She leaned forward slowly, her voice almost a whisper. "That's Mercy Hill Medical Center." Elliot's eyes widened. "You know it." "I work there," she said, still stunned. "I've worked there for over a year." He lit up. "Just a little. Then maybe you know my dad. Maybe you can help me find him." Maya smiled despite the unease creeping in. "Maybe. Do you know his name?" "Charles?" he said quickly. "Charles Wittman." She froze. That name. It rang in her head like Abel, sharp, familiar, but distant. She'd heard it before somewhere, but where? The name echoed through her mind, dancing around a memory she couldn't quite reach. "I'm not sure," she murmured, honest. "It sounds familiar, but there are so many people there." Elliot's face sank, but not completely. Maya reached out, resting a hand near his, not touching, just near. "Listen, tomorrow morning I have to go in for work. I'll take you with me. Maybe if we sk around, we'll find someone who knows where he is. We'll figure it out together, okay?" He looked at her for a long moment. Ariel. Look, not one of fear or mistrust, but something that cracked through his wall. Then he nodded. Later that night, after Elliot had fallen asleep on the couch, wrapped tight in the blanket she always kept for guests, but never used, Ma stood at her tiny kitchen window, staring out at the night. The rain had stopped. The street was silent. But inside, her storm had only just begun. She thought of the name again. Charles Wittman. Why did it stick? She remembered hearing it once. Maybe during a morning huddle, a distant conversation between admin staff, not someone she'd ever seen face to face. Still, something pulled at her. This wasn't just coincidence. This boy didn't just end upon her street by chance. And then, another thought hit her sharp and cruel. She'd been working for years to be taken seriously, to be more than just the black nurse, to be seen for her care, her skill, her commitment. And now she was about to walk into that space with a child. No one knew, whose skin didn't match hers, with no explanation that would satisfy their assumptions. But then she turned to look at Elliot, his chest rising and falling with the kind of peaceful sleep only exhaustion could bring. She'd do it anyway, even if they stared, even if they whispered, even if they used it to judge her, to drag her down, because this wasn't about them. It was about a boy with no dry clothes, no safe place, and a torn picture clutched in his hand like a lifeline. It was about the promise she'd made without saying the words. She was going to help him find his father, and no one, not judgment, not protocol, not fear, was going to stop her. The next morning broke gray and slow, with a thin mist still hanging in the air like Thesky hadn't fully recovered from last night's storm. Maya stood at the mirror, brushing her edges, tying her bun tighter than usual. Her teal scrubs were freshly laundered, her sneakers clean but worn. Everything about her appearance neat, competent, intentional. She glanced over her shoulder at Elliot, still sitting quietly at the edge of the couch, his backpack held tight to his chest like a life vet. His hair was dry now, his cheeks no longer flushed from cold, but his shirt was a little too big and frayed at the collar. The pants Maya had found were clean, but the knees were scuffed from years of her brother's play. He looked like what he was, Achilled holding himself together with borrowed fabric and silence. "Ready?" she asked, turning to him with a small smile. He nodded, eyes uncertain but determined. On the way to the hospital, the car was quiet, save for the soft hum of tires over wet pavement. Elliot kept looking out the window, his fingers twitching, as he traced invisible patterns on the glass. Maya wanted to say something comforting, something brave, but her thoughts were restless. The name Charles Wittman still echoed in the back of her mind, like a puzzle piece hovering just out of reach. More than that, though, was the low ache in her gut, the one that always came before stepping into a space where she had Toby twice as good just to be seen as enough. Mercy Hill came into view, talons sleek, all sharp angles and glass, a symbol of care on the surface, but to Maya it was more complicated. She parked in the staff lot, took Elliot's hand without thinking, and led him in through the side entrance. The moment they stepped into the fluorescent litholway, she felt it, the change in temperature, not in the air, but in the gazes. A pause in conversation at the front desk. A nurse's eyes flicking from her to Elliot, the beginning of judgment blooming like mold. "Is that your nephew?" someone asked behind her. She turned to see Mara, a senior nurse, with a tight bun and a tighter smile. Her voice was honeyed, but the eyes behind it were steel. "No," Maya said simply. "He's with me today just for a bit." Mara blinked, her smile flickering. You know we're not supposed to have guests during shifts, but won't be in the way. I'm helping him find his father. Maya Saeed, trying to keep her tone steady. Professional. She didn't owe an explanation, but she knew how quickly silence would be twisted into suspicion. Mara gave a small hum, then turned back to her computer. Maya felt the heat of whispers begin to rise behind her. They walked deeper into the building. Elliot clung closer, shrinking into himself as more staff passed by. Some stared, others tried not to. One orderly muttered under his breath, just loud enough, "This ain't a daycare." Another chuckled. Did she pull him off the street? Elliot's shoulders tightened with every word, and Maya's jaw clenched. But she kept walking. She had promised him. At the nurse's station, she logged into her terminal while Elliot stood nearby, eyes wide and searching. Every now and then he'd glance up at someone passing, hoping, then quickly look away. Maya asked a few co-workers discreetly, "Do you know a Charles Wittman? He might be a doctor, maybe an admin." No one gave her a straight answer. Most just shrugged, or looked confused, and a few seemed almost annoyed she was asking. Then came the voice she'd been dreading all morning. "Maya Brooks," snapped Helen, the head nurse, short, sharp, and always 2 seconds away from disapproval. She marched over, arms crossed, eyes already set to problem. What exactly is this? Maya turned slowly. He's looking for his father. I thought someone here might recognize the name. Helen's lips thinned. So you brought a child, a stranger, into a sterile work environment. We have rules, Maya. You don't bring street kids in here because you feel sorry for them. Maya felt the words hit like slaps. Elliot flinched beside her. He's not a street kid. He's a lost child, she said, holding her voice level. And I didn't bring him here to play. I brought him here to help. And who gave you that authority? Helen barked. Who gave you permission to turn this hospital into your personal charity? You think this makes you some kind of hero? No, it makes you reckless. Other. Staff were watching now, a few pretending not to, but their ears were tuned in. He's not causing harm, Maya Saeed, voice colder now. He's a human being. He deserves to be safe. Helen deserves to be in child protective custody, Helen snapped. And you deserve disciplinary action for violating protocol. Escort the boy out now. Maya stepped between Helen and Elliot instinctively. Don't touch him and don't raise your voice, Helen countered. You may be popular with a few patients, Maya, but that doesn't put you above rules. You brought in a filthy kid in dirty clothes with no idea, no relation to you into my hospital. That's unacceptable. Something cracked then, not in Maya's voice, which remained steady, but in her chest, where years of being the good one, of nodding politely when disrespected, of proving and proving and proving herself just to be tolerated, collapsed under the weight of this moment. You don't get to decide who belongs here, she said quietly. Not based on what they wear or what they look like or who they remind you of. Helen's eyes narrowed. Get him out or I will. Elliot, who had been silent through the entire exchange, suddenly whispered, Mayor, I'm sorry. I didn't mean to make trouble. She turned to him, her expression softening immediately. You didn't do anything wrong. But they're mad, he murmured, eyes glassy. They're wrong, she said firmly. You're just a boy trying to find his father. That's not a crime. Helen made a sharp gesture to security nearby who had started watching from across the hallway. Maya felt her blood rush to her head, ready to shield Elliot if she had to, heart pounding, breath tight. And then, just as the tension reached its peak, just as the whole floor seemed to lean forward toward the moment something might explode, a voice cut through the chaos, clear and urgent. But that voice belonged to another chapter. For now Maya stood her ground because no matter how uncomfortable it made them, no matter how many rules they tried to weaponize, she knew the truth. Elliot. The voice rang out like a clap in a silent cathedral, firm, frantic, and utterly human. In that instant, everything in the corridor froze. Even Helen, mid-gesture toward security, stiffened. Maya turned sharply, her breath catching, and Elliot's head snapped up, eyes widening, searching. The crowd of hospital staff parted instinctively, as if the sound itself had pushed them aside. And then he appeared, a tall man in a dark coat, face pale and drawn, hair disheveled like he hadn't slept, like he hadn't breathed properly in days. His eyes locked on Elliot's small form, and every inch of tension collapsed into motion. "Elliot," he breathed again, rushing forward. The boy let out a sound that wasn't quite a cry and wasn't quite a laugh. "Dad," he ran straight through the frozen field of judgment, arms outstretched, crashing into the man's embrace with a force that made everyone watching feel like intruders. The man dropped to his knees and wrapped Elliot so tightly into his chest it was hard to tell where one ended and the other began. He was trembling, not from cold, but from something deeper. Relief, heartbreak, gratitude. His voice cracked as he spoke into Elliot's hair. "I looked everywhere. I didn't know where you went. God. I thought I lost you." Maya stood still, hands clenched by her sides, pulse hammering in her ears. She didn't know what to do, whether to speak, whether to leave. Her eyes burned, but she held herself together. This moment wasn't hers. It was theirs. The man finally looked up. His gaze swept past the nurses, past the stunned onlookers, past Helen, and landed on Maya. Something changed in his expression, recognition, and then understanding. He stood slowly, still holding Elliot's hand. "You found him," he said, voice low but steady. "You brought him here." Maya gave a small nod. He was alone on the street in the rain. He looked at Elliot again, as if making sure he was still real. Then back to Maya. "Thank you. I owe you more than I can say." Helen stepped forward, clearing her throat, as if trying to reclaim control. "Excuse me," she said sharply. "I don't know who you are, but this boy appeared here without clearance." "And I'm Charles Wittman," he interrupted, not raising his voice, but cutting through hers like glass. "CEO of this hospital." The air vanished from the hallway. Noon moved. Helen blinked, clearly trying to process what had just been said, her posture flickering between defiance and alarm. I wasn't aware." "You weren't aware of what my son looks like?" "When he's scared and alone," he said, his tone sharpening. "Or were you just too busy judging the woman who helped him?" Maya's heart dropped at the words. "My son." She looked at Elliot again, really looked, and suddenly it clicked. Theckin, the eyes, the angle of the brows. The familiarity wasn't in the name, it was in the face. "She violated protocol," Helen said, her voice smaller now, less certain. "She brought an unauthorized child into a patient care environment because she was the only one who cared," Charles snapped, "while the rest of you ignored a scared child, labeled him, threatened him, and treated a woman of compassion like a criminal." There was a long silence. Not a word, not a whisper. The staff who had chuckled, who had stared, who had whispered behind cupped hands, all stood like statues, shame crawling up their necks. Charles turned to Maya again. "I want you to know that your kindness saved my son. I don't care about policies when they're used to justify cruelty." She swallowed hard, suddenly unsure what to say. "I didn't know who he was. I couldn't leave him, that's what makes it matter more," he said. "You helped him when you thought he was no one." Then he looked toward Helen. "You're dismissed, effective immediately." "What?" Helen's voice was brittle, breaking. "You can't. I just did." She opened her mouth to argue, then saw his face. Saw that it wasn't anger driving him, but clarity. She stepped back, Heres flickering to the others. But Noon moved to support her. One by one, heads turned away. She turned and walked off. her steps brisk and silent. Charles looked around the hallway, his hand resting gently on Elliot's shoulder. "Let this be a reminder to everyone here. Judgment doesn't save lives. Compassion does." No one answered. No one dared to. Elliot, still clutching his father's hand, looked up at Maya and tugged his sleeve. "Dad," he whispered. "She's the one who gave. Me food, dry clothes." She stayed with me all night. Charles followed his son's eyes and stepped toward Maya, extending his hand. "Maya Brooks, I've heard your name in staff evaluations. You're the kind of nurse every hospital dreams of, but I never imagined you'd become the reason I found my son again." She took his hand slowly, humbled. "I didn't do anything anyone else here wouldn't have done," she said quietly, though her eyes betrayed the truth. They hadn't. "But you did," he said, "and you didn't hesitate." Behind them, someone finally spoke. A young intern Maya had barely noticed before. "She's the reason I applied here," he said. "She treated my mother with kindness during chemo. That's what stuck with me." Another nurse chimed in, softer. "She stayed past her shift for my patient last week." No one asked her to, and slowly, one by one, people started nodding, not just to Charles but to Maya in quiet agreement, in belated recognition, in apology. Maya didn't need the praise. She never had. But in that moment, surrounded by people who had tried to reduce her worth to rules and assumptions, she felt something shift, a validation that went deeper than a title or an evaluation. Then, Elliot reached for her hand, placing his small fingers into hers with quiet trust. "Can I still stay with you sometimes?" he asked. Maya smiled gently. "Anytime." For the first time that day, her eyes filled, and this time she let the tears fall. She had stood in the fire, and now in the calm after the storm. The world had finally seen her. The morning sun spilled over the rooftops, soft and golden, the kind of light that made even the tired bricks of the hospital's facade look warm. Days had passed since the moment everything changed. But for Maya, it hadn't truly sunk in. Not when Charles had thanked her. Not even when Helen was escorted out. But now, walking through the main lobby, where staff nodded at her, not with suspicion, but with something close to respect, she felt it. Not just a shift in how others saw her, but in how she saw herself. She wasn't just tolerated here anymore. She belonged. And more than that, she mattered. She walked past the front desk, her new ID badge heavier around her neck. Head nurse Maya Brooks. The title still felt strange, like trying on a coat that didn't quite fit yet, but she was growing into it with each steady step. It wasn't about the power or the authority. It was about being trusted to lead, to shape something better. She hadn't asked for it. She'd earned it quietly, consistently, through choices made in the dark without any promise of reward. And now that light was finally reaching her. Upstairs, Elliot sat cross-legged in Charles's office, sketching with colored pencils on Athic pad. A small sunlit corner had been arranged just for him. Soft chair, shelf of books, a blanket folded neatly on the armrest. Maya stepped in with her usual knock, and he looked up with a grin that made her heart stretch. "Maya, look, I drew the hospital. That's where you work, and that's where Dad finds me." She smiled and walked over, crouching beside him. The drawing was rough but clear. Two stick figures, one taller with messy hair, one smaller with a backpack. Between them stood a brown-skinned figure in teal scrubs, arms outstretched. "You gave me a cape," she teased gently. "Because you're like a superhero," Elliot said, shrugging. Like it was obvious. Charles turned from his desk, a stack of policy drafts in one hand, and offered a knowing smile. "I can't argue with that." She stood, brushing imaginary lint off her sleeve. "You know, I never meant for any of this. I just did what felt right." "That's why it worked," Charles said, "and why I'm asking for more than just your leadership on the floor." He gestured to the papers on his desk. I've been thinking since that day. There are kids like Elliot everywhere, lost, forgotten, invisible, and if a hospital can't see them, can't help them, then what are we even doing? Maya's eyes narrowed slightly, not in suspicion, but in quiet calculation. What do you have in mind? A foundation, he said. Private, independent, operated out of this hospital, but not bound by the red tape. A fund to provide treatment for children in crisis, homeless, abandoned, or just slipping through cracks too wide for the system to cover. I want you to run it with me. The idea hit her like a breath she hadn't realized she'd been holding. She imagined it, not just reacting to pain, but preventing it, creating something permanent out of what had been a single instinctive act of compassion. You're serious? I am, he said. And I trust you because you didn't wait for permission to do the right thing. Maya looked over at Elliot, now humming quietly as he shaded a tree in his drawing, then back at Charles. Her answer was quiet, but unshakable. Let's do it. The foundation took shape faster than anyone expected. Charles's name opened doors, but it was Maya's story that moved hearts. Donors responded not to press releases, but to the raw truth of a nurse who chose to stop for a child no one else saw. The hospital staff, who once whispered, now volunteered extra hours. Some even came to her directly with apologies, and though she didn't need them, she accepted each one with grace. On the night of the Foundation's launch, the conference room was transformed into something bright, almost sacred. Photographs of children helped testimonies from parents. A mural of Elliot's original drawing enlarged on canvas and framed in the entry. Maya stood by the podium wearing her best blouse, nervous but steady. She didn't speak long, just enough. I didn't do anything heroic, she said to the crowd of doctors, nurses, donors, and strangers. I saw a child in pain and I stopped. That shouldn't make me exceptional. That should make me human. The room held its breath before erupting, in quiet applause, the kind that carries more weight than thunder. Later that night, long after the speeches, Maya walked outside with Elliot, hand in hand. The city lights flickered above, and the night was calm, dry finally. Elliot looked up at her. Do you think other kids like me will be okay now? She paused, then knelt beside him. I think they'll have someone watching out for them, someone who won't look away. He nodded like he understood more than he should. Then he reached into his pocket and pulled out the old crumpled magazine clipping. The picture of the hospital now smoothed, at the edges, still creased but cherished. I want to keep this, he said, to remember that day. But maybe we can draw a new one too. A better one. Maya smiled. Let's do that together. As they stood beneath the glow of a new beginning, the wind carried a softness through the trees, and Maya thought about that first night. The rain, Thessalon's, the boy who didn't speak. She remembered how empty the world had felt, how heavy her heart had been. But not anymore. Now there was warmth where there had once been cold. Now there was a boy with a home. Now there was a purpose born not from plans or ambition, but from a single choice to care, when it was inconvenient to act when no one else would. And from that single act a future had bloomed not just for Elliot, not just for Maya, but for every child out there still waiting in the rain. Join us to share meaningful stories by hitting the like and subscribe buttons. Don't forget to turn on the notification bell to start your day with profound lessons and heartfelt empathy.